continuing our study through the chapter on the doctrine of human beings, and Guthrie, how he puts his thing in there. Who are we? And so, did anyone put a bullet point where we are?
Human life and community.
That's
is
where I
what
thought
I
we
have.
were. Right. Okay.
What point is that?
4, Roman numeral 4. So page 41.
Okay.
All right, so human life in community, and I'll read a section from Guthrie, page 202 in his book. To be a human being in God's image is to live in fellowship not only with God, but also with our fellow human beings. People who seek escape from life in community into a life of safe independence and self-sufficiency seek to escape their own humanity. True humanity is by definition co-humanity. In order to grasp what this means, let us go back to the question we raised earlier. What is the significance of the fact that Genesis 1:27 identifies creation in the image of God with the creation of human beings as male and female? We can best understand what it means in contrast to what it does not mean. All right, so Guthrie is going to use exclusion, right, like he does quite often, to say, where does sin come from? Well, let's talk about where sin does not come from, right? Mm-hmm. He's like checking things off a list until you get to his right piece. So, according to Guthrie, to be in fellowship with God, or to be a human being, right, in God's understanding of what a human being is, the fellowship must not only be between us or the individual and God, but between the individual and other individuals. Mm-hmm. We are made to be within community. Now, this can be tricky. It doesn't mean that, you have to live in, the biggest city in the world amongst all the people, but it means that we must have some sense of community, right? So whatever that community looks like, is upon your taste. Some people live in small communities, some live in large communities, urban, suburban, rural. I mean, that's up to you, but you must be connected to humanity. Now, that has its benefits, and it also has its challenges. I was just reading an article, and I can't remember, it was from a science journal online, and it was talking about why when we get older we don't want to be around people as much. Or it said in one of the paragraphs, it says, why when you get older do we seem to hate people more and more? And it was a great article because it looked at, some of the factors, why, and it talked about, we become more set in our ways, we know what we want in life, we don't have time for pettiness. It was a fantastic article. It really was. And it, some of the other points were, you've already made your lifelong friends, but it was very interesting because I know a few people, as they've gotten older, that just want to be left alone. And so this is the challenge that, as we are humans and we consider ourselves created by God, we must belong to some sense of community. According to Guthrie, this is kind of how we're hardwired, right? Christ wants us within a community, and that's the church. Remember, we talked in church, and we've talked here last week. When it comes to our connection with God, there really are no lone wolves, right? Even John the Baptist, who lived out in the wilderness, had to deal with lots of people, I would imagine in the daytime, as they came out and said, baptize us, or who gives you the right to do this? So sometimes community is, people who, drive us up a wall, right? But, they were still John's people. So we're going to break this down again by looking at what it does not mean to try to figure out, what Guthrie is talking about here. So the first number under Roman numeral 4 is, just because we are male or female does not mean that God is male or female or some weird conglomeration of both, right? We go back to John 4 with Jesus, with his encounter, with the woman at the well, and they have a very deep theological conversation. They really do. Once they get past that living water, what that means, They go really deep in conversation. And part of it is the woman challenges Jesus because she's a Samaritan and he's a Jew. And she says, hey, you guys say you worship down there. We say we worship up here. What's the right answer? Great question.
Yeah.
Great question. And Jesus says,
Doesn't matter.
yes, exactly. Jesus says there's going to come a time when it doesn't make a difference where you worship because God is what?
Everywhere.
God is everywhere. Exactly. He says God is spirit. Right, so we cannot, it's hard because it's been ingrained, especially within Western culture, right? We think about our artwork. We think about what do we see in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel? Yeah, what's that famous picture?
Yeah.
Right, the painting. It's the center, right? God touching the finger of Adam, bringing life into humanity, or life into man as it was then.
Yeah.
And God is this big old white guy with a big white beard, flowing robes, Birkenstocks, and he's bringing like me, right? Bringing life into humanity, right? And so we must understand that it means that God is not a man and God is not a woman or some weird mixture of both, right? Jesus is a man. Get that. Understand that. God is described within the Father is described, with masculine pronouns, and the Spirit is not neutral, but sometimes the Spirit will have feminine attributes given to the Spirit, and sometimes masculine attributes given to the Spirit. But we must understand, just because Jesus calls God Father, does not mean that the Father is this big man sitting on this big throne. It's God is spirit, right? So we must understand that God is not some woman or man sitting on some big throne like we would imagine, right, from our own experiences here on earth. So that's the first thing, right? The second thing is our sexuality or lack of it does not make us in the image of God, right? So that has nothing to do with it. Right? Sexuality, when it comes to God, that does not make us in the image of God. 3, our creation as male and female does not mean that the only relationships between the opposite sex are genuinely human, right? We interact with each other. Men interact with men, women interact with women. It doesn't mean just because we're made male and female that that's how we understand the relationship with God. That does not deal with that as well. And finally, our creation in God's image as male and female does not bless any of the ancient or modern stereotypes of the proper role of males and females, right? So it doesn't say that this is the way it was in the biblical days and this is the way it must be now, right? This is not what this is saying either. When we think about it, one of the most it's frustrating in a more of a comical way when I hear people say, we must get back to the old days. We must get back to the biblical days and how they did it. That's when the church was the best. And my first response is, have you read the Bible lately? Because if you think that was the perfect times, they had plenty of issues just like we do. They might be different, but they had plenty of problems. And I'm sure Paul wasn't just yanking out his hair because everything was perfect. It wasn't. The church was never this perfect group where everyone thought alike and everyone, said, yes, Paul, we agree. That's a wonderful idea. We'll start that tomorrow. It's never like that. It's never, ever like that.
That'd be nice, huh?
It would be nice. It would be nice. Paul's job would have been very easy, but it wasn't. This poor guy.
There'd be no letters.
Yeah, there would be no letter. Right, we would have a very thin New Testament, but it wasn't. And so we must not say, well, the roles of humanity, men and women in the ancient days or modern days, this is what the blessing is. We must remember creation is, the condition, the broken condition is the same with them as it is with us, right? So we can't use that as a litmus. That would be a poor litmus. And finally, our creation, number 5, our creation in the image of God as male and female does not mean that our humanity is fulfilled only in individual personal relationships, right? So it's not fulfilled with one-on-one relationships, whether it being a spouse, whether it being a friend, a colleague, right, a partner. That's not enough. That's not enough either. It has to be greater than that. It has to be greater than that. Now, these things occur, right? Guthrie is not saying it's bad to have individual relations. No, it's not what Guthrie is saying. But Guthrie is saying that this is not enough. It's not enough to say that our creation image of God does not mean our humanity is fulfilled only in these relationships. Because think about, even in a relationship, an individual relationship between spouses, friends, colleagues, associates, it's broken too. It's broken too, right? It's fractured because of, our nature, because of the fallen condition that we all have
What do you mean by
to struggle
it's
with.
broken?
Like,
It's not complete, or it's...
well, it's
There are always problems.
yeah. There's always problems. Like it's the condition. We all live with,
It's
creation is the condition that we all have to live in. That some people describe it as the fall. I don't like using the term original sin. I don't kind of buy into that. To me, it's more like this is what happened. We rebelled against God. It's this condition. It's this condition that all of creation is wrapped in. So, life and death, right? It's our nature. We do good, but we also do bad.
Probably a large part of relationship problems are based on misunderstandings.
Yeah. And lack of communication.
Right.
Yeah. So, and that's across the board.
Yeah.
That's across the board. It could be, like, again, it could be between spouses, people in a romantic relationship, friends. You see it all the time. It's all over the place. It's because, our own emotions get in the way, or our own desires or wants get in the way. It could be anything. It could be anything. Now, again, some of these things are not bad, but it doesn't mean that these make us genuinely human, right? These are not the perfect pieces. They might be partial, like fragments of the puzzle, but they're not the whole thing. Because we want to understand what it means to be human and our relationship with God, we need a more full picture than just this. So if these are just fragments or pieces or incorrect statements, Guthrie is trying to point at something that is greater. And Guthrie says, if you move down to as you move down to 5, in the following discussion, we will consider the ways in which people most commonly relate to one another. It is important to emphasize that people who are more or less limited in their ability to communicate with one another in these usual ways can be just as human, sometimes more human, than others who are more fortunate. Blind people can sometimes see more clearly and be more willing to let themselves be seen as they are than some others with 20/20 vision. People who cannot speak can sometimes say more than others who speak all too easily, quickly, and often. I like that. People who cannot hear are sometimes more sensitive to what is really being said and what is really going on than others who hear every word. People with physical disabilities sometimes help others in ways that go far beyond ordinary means of helping. They remind us that every one of us is handicapped and in need of help in one way or another. Some of them set an example for all of us in their ability to graciously and thankfully receive help. So, we're now going to unpack this section. So, seeing and being seen, right? So Guthrie is now going to work on some of these things. So seeing and being seen, looking at one another eye to eye. What does that mean? Looking at one another eye to eye.
being straight up with each other.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
not holding back.
Not holding back, right? I would say being deliberate. And what else? When you come to someone eye to eye, and I'm not saying, in a you're gonna fight, but when you come up to someone and really look, see each other eye to eye, you are allowing yourself to be vulnerable. You're allowing yourself to be seen, right? And and vice versa. The other individual is doing the same exact thing. So just as dehumanizing as not seeing is letting ourselves be seen. Instead of being open enough to let other people see us who we really are, we act like the businessman, the mother, the father, the conservative, or the liberal, whatever role we assume and imagine we try to protect. We all have the functions to fulfill, but when we use the function as a mask to hide behind, we make it impossible really to do what our function requires us just because we avoid genuinely impersonal human relationships. Right? So Guthrie is saying, we have these titles, we have these roles in society, right? We are who we are. I am this person, I am a minister, right? I am married, I am a father. But sometimes we hide behind these roles, right? Or because of these roles, perhaps we're not as open with one another. And each of us has these roles. Each of us has these. And Guthrie says sometimes we wear these as masks. So to be able to look at each other eye to eye, allowing the other, friend, spouse, stranger, it makes us vulnerable, right? And we need to sometimes do that, not hide behind who we are, but open up, to have a deeper relationship, to better understand who we are as humans, and to better understand our neighbor, right? So, and these, whether these are considered defense mechanisms, right? And we all have them. We all put up airs at times. I always thought about, what it would be like going to a reunion, a school reunion, and unfortunately for my generation, I think Facebook has absolutely slaughtered reunions because it's not like, what have you done for the last 10 years? I know exactly what you've done for the last 10 years. You put it on Facebook. I know what your family looks like. I know what you do for a living. I know how bald you are. You know how bald I am. Our hair's all gone. So we do, right? Yeah. But a lot of times in reunions, people are not so transparent. What do you do? Well, I do this, I do that, but in reality, he or she might not do that. So, there is this, this putting on of airs. And so, according to Guthrie, looking at one another eye to eye, be open, be honest, because Guthrie then follows with another, what is the second bullet under this?
Speaking and listening.
Well, no, under looking at one another eye
It
to eye.
can
Can be
be
painful.
painful.
It can be painful. And it can be painful. It can be painful.
There, in Canada, just a couple of months ago, at the Invictus Games, which Prince Harry founded, he gave a speech, and he said, he said, why did I found this charity?
Mm-hmm.
And he had been in Afghanistan twice himself, and he said, because the more he delved into his own mental health issues of not grieving the death of his mother, he began to realize that one of the biggest problems with these men and women who had been hurt in Afghanistan when they came back was that they needed to get people to understand, don't define me by my injuries, don't define me by my disabilities, define me by what's inside of me. I'm trying to remember his exact words, but by what's inside of me and by my abilities.
Yeah.
And look at me for that, not at my disabilities. It sounds like that's...
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, and that's getting to know the actual individual.
Okay. And I'm missing the point of this. What is Guthrie saying? That what, it seems like we need something more than this?
No, this is what Guthrie is saying to try to help us find true humanity. What it means to be human. Remember, this whole chapter is what it means to be human. And so Guthrie began this section on what it does not mean, right? What we do not look at and say, well, this is what it means to be human. You know, I'm a man and she's a woman. Well, that's part of it, but we need to find something deeper, what it means to be human, right? We look, and of course, as Jesus being the true model of what it means to be human, we need to look at what he did and how he related to us and how other people related to Christ. So what Guthrie is doing is trying to encourage the reader to go deeper when it comes to trying to figure out what it means to be a human being. So we must really try to understand who we are as people. And that means deeper relationships, right? Looking deeper. So looking deeper at, so seeing and being seen, looking at one another eye to eye. Trying to shed off stereotypes. So it might not just be, friends. It might not be just Patty and I, or Suhail and I, or Don and Andy. It could be groups of people, right? It's when groups are dehumanized. And this has happened all throughout history. It still happens. It happened in history. And as long as there's humanity, it probably will always happen. And this is a downside of things that we do, right? And it's trying to look at the other and seeing the other as a human, right? And so, but looking at one another eye to eye can also be painful. Why can it be painful? To truly understand the other. Why can it truly be painful?
Sometimes like a mirror also, because you can see yourself and your prejudice and...
Yeah. You can see yourself. You can see your own shortcomings.
Yeah, your prejudice against other people.
Prejudice, yeah. Your own shortfalls, right? Your own weaknesses. So and this is probably why people are uncomfortable doing this, right? Again, it makes you vulnerable. And so you have to be prepared for that, right? It's no different than when people go speak with a therapist. Right, and it's the therapist's job to help that individual come to realizations on certain topics, depending on what the issues are. But it's the patient to allow themselves to be vulnerable, as the therapist is working along with them. So yes, it can be painful to understand our weaknesses, or because we are making ourselves vulnerable. We are making ourselves vulnerable. So seeing and being seen, looking at one another eye to eye. Speaking and listening, looks can be deceiving. What does that mean? We have an idiom for that.
It's easy to judge people based on what you see on the outside.
Yeah. What's the little idiom we have?
Beauty's only skin deep.
Well, that's one of them. I didn't even think of that one. Yes, beauty's only skin deep. Good. I was thinking of, you can't judge a book by its cover. Yeah, but that one is perfect. That's another one that helps us understand that, right? So Guthrie opens up this chapter by saying, or this section by saying, important as they are, looks can be deceiving. To know others by sight alone is not yet really to know them. To judge by appearance alone is often to gain a false impression. Real human encounter does not take place until speaking and listening are added to seeing and being seen. When we speak to each other, we are saying, let me explain to you who I am, and let me tell you who I think you are. Let me tell you something you don't know, but need to know about me and my impression of you. We take each other seriously enough to share ourselves and to try to understand one another. I have nothing to say to her, or we are not speaking, means a deliberate denial of the very thing that makes us human beings. Speaking is useless without listening. Willingness to listen to what others are saying, not just waiting for them to stop talking so I could talk, says, I do not really know you, but I want to. I want to give you a chance to correct the false impression I may have of you. I believe that you have something to tell me that I need to learn. Listening is perhaps even more important than speaking as a way of taking another person seriously. He has nothing to say that could possibly interest me, or I wasn't listening, or shut up, means the refusal to accept another person as a human being, and therefore also the denial of our own humanity. Words, of course, may be dishonest words, empty words, or mere propaganda. They can prevent as establish real communication. But there can be no communication without words. Human relations means willingness to speak with the intention of clarifying and not concealing the truth, and listen with openness to change my mind as a result of what I hear. So, looks can be deceiving. So it's not just looking at the other, or a neighbor, or a friend, or a stranger, or a spouse. It's deeper than that, right? It's speaking, and as Guthrie says, probably more importantly, listening to try to understand the other individual, right? So when we think about, if we say Jesus is the perfect human, right, the best model that we have of what it means to be human, how did Jesus interact with others, with other people? Think about it for a second. How did he interact?
He didn't hold anything back.
Yeah, he didn't. Yeah, he definitely didn't hold anything back, right? Did he listen to other people?
Yeah.
Yeah. Jesus was very intentional about creating relationships. Jesus didn't treat people as numbers, as some misunderstand. It's not, Jesus is not running around saying, oh, I got to get you to heaven. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, I saved you. That's 5, 6, now get out of my way, next person coming up. He didn't treat people like that. He treated people, as humans, right? As part of a family. So, Jesus built relationships with people. Come on down, Zacchaeus, I'm going to come to your house for dinner tonight. Right? Who touched me? I felt the power leave me. Right? He didn't sit there and yell, who touched me, beat that woman, have her stoned. Who touched me? Because he knew if someone touched him and the power left him, this individual is pretty special. He understood that. I probably wanted to meet her, right? So Jesus is all about connections and making relationships. It's all relational to Christ, right? Think about the disciples. For 3 years, they were family. They were friends. They walked together. They ate together. They probably all slept in the same area. They learned together. They saw things together. They experienced life together for those 3 years. This is why when Jesus is arrested and crucified, their world is absolutely shattered. Absolutely shattered. So when you think about Jesus and his ministry, it's speaking, but it's also listening. Now, Jesus, of course, has an advantage because he kind of knows what people are going to say before they say it, as we've noticed in our study in John with Nicodemus. Right? Nicodemus comes and offers some flattery, and Jesus just makes a beeline right to what he's thinking. I know what you want. You want to talk about eternal life? Let's talk about eternal life. So, but this is how we must interact with each other, right? It is speaking, but it's also listening, right? When we just speak, we are just giving what we think we already know, right? According to Guthrie. And that might include our own perceptions, misnomers. It could be, what does the therapist call it? Cognitive distortions. Dissonance, yeah. Cognitive dissonance, right? So how we perceive the individual or the situation. But if we really want to get the full picture, we really need to listen to what the other person has to say, right? Now, the other person it might be exactly what you think. It might be something totally different. right?
Confirmation bias, maybe?
Yeah, to confirm our bias?
Confirmation bias is
What's that?
where you have an opinion on something, and when you get new information, you look at it through a filter
Yes,
of what you already think.
right.
So cognitive dissonance is where you have two ideas that you can't
Reconcile.
reconcile. So
Yeah, well, cognitive distortion is more like we
Yeah.
have this view on something, but it's in our mind, and that
Okay.
view is incorrect.
okay, then
Right.
distortion was probably what you're looking for.
Yeah, well, and dissonance too. I mean, it's a myriad of different things, you know,
Right.
because again, it's what we're thinking, and so Guthrie would say, if true humanity is to occur, it can't just be what we think, right? You need to give the other individual an opportunity to talk. And it's just like, for me, it's like praying and meditating. Praying, a lot of praying is us doing what?
Talking to God.
Yeah, you know, to give God the opportunity to talk back. We got to be quiet for a while, right? We can either sit still, we can meditate, we can read the scriptures, but allow God to speak back to us, right? So it creates this open line between us and God, and the same thing is with humanity, right? So looks can be deceiving. So it's not just looking at each other eye to eye and seeing the other as human, part of this family that we all live in, breaking down the concepts and not allowing people to dehumanize others, because nothing ever good becomes of that. And it's also speaking and listening. It's also opening lines of conversation to understand that, yes, our opinions might be important, but so is the opinion of the other individual is also important, right? And this is how we open up. Helping and being helped, excuse me. True helping is not scratching one another's back. Right, what does that imply?
You're expecting something in return.
Yeah, exactly.
That's politics.
That's politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, or other organizations.
Yeah.
Right, not so, well, I can't even say that's, would be legal in politics, that should be illegal in politics as well. So yeah, you scratch my back, I scratch your back, right? You do me a favor, I do you a favor, right? So true helping is not scratching one another's back, because as Don brought out, I think it was Don who first said it, you know, you want something back,
Yeah.
right? It's and this works in many ways, especially within humanity. Think about love with humans, right? We love with strings attached. There is a breaking point within humanity. You know, I love you, and if you keep abusing me, you know, that love is going to wear down, right? And eventually, you know, there are people who have to break, you know, things get broke. And then when we think about as God loves us, there is no strings. No strings attached. When God loves us unconditionally. And so even when we turn and walk away, there are people who've been so angry with God who say things like, I hate you, I want you out of my life, and totally walk away. And God is still there. God is still there hoping for reconciliation, right? God does not turn God's back on any individual when it comes to that. We think about how many times the Israelites did, and even after Babylon comes in and destroys the temple, sacks the land, takes people away into bondage and moves them all over the place, Ezekiel says eventually that God's anger subsides. It's time to go home. It's time to go home. If that's not unconditional love, I don't know what is. And so when we think about things like this, when we help each other, we should not expect something back in return. It's like a gift. You give something to someone not expecting to have something back. You don't pay for that gift, right? It wouldn't be a gift any longer. right? It's like how we understand salvation in the Reformed tradition, right? Christ gives us the gift of eternal life. It's a gift. I mean, we're brought into this. It's a gift. It's nothing that we have earned to do this. Because if that would be the case, none of us would have it.
Right.
Right? It's simply given to us, which makes it even more beautiful, even more mind-boggling as we try to understand that. Right? It's just a gift. So when we truly help someone, it should not be because I want something back from you. So what are some examples of this, or how we should put this in play, of helping without wanting to be helped back?
When you give to charity.
When you give to charity. Yeah. Yeah, people don't give to St. Jude, to help children out who are ill, who are sick, who are battling cancer, to hope one day that kid will come back and repay them. It's not why we do it, right? You do it because that little kid needs a fighting shot, right? And we give because you want to help. Charity is a beautiful example of that. Is you give because you don't want anything back, right? What about ministry? Think about missions.
Right.
Right? We give, we send people out. The Colbys from our congregation, right? When we help with the winter shelter. You don't serve, you don't give, we don't staff because we want something back. You do it because Jesus says do it. It's the right thing to do. Right? This to me also is frustrating, even when some people will view Christianity and say, I do this one day so I'll have a lot of crowns when I get to the kingdom. I'm like, that's why you do it?
Really?
You should do it because Jesus says, do it. I command you to do it. And this is what it's all about. We should serve because Jesus just says serve. And that's it. Really. To me, it's that simple. So we serve and we help, not wanting something back in return. Jesus, think about when Jesus did it. He would say sometimes, don't tell anyone. Keep this under, under the carpet for a while, and that never works. You've been blind your whole life and now Jesus gives you sight. I would say, how many of us would be able to keep that a secret?
Kind of hard.
It's
How'd
kinda-
that happen? Well, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I woke up today and now I can see. And I'm sure Jesus understood this would happen. He's just trying to keep his adversaries, simmering and not boiling. It's just. But yeah, he did things because he loved humanity. He loved people, and that's why he did it. So, relying on the help from the other as well is the second part. It's allowing to be helped. Now, other factors now roll in for that one. Maybe pride, where you don't want to take the help, but allowing people to help. If no one allows anyone else to help, how do you serve? That's kind of hard. It's kind of hard. And so part of these things is thinking about, because we would say it's an issue of pride sometimes. I don't need your help. I don't want help. I don't want a handout. We hear that a lot, right? I don't want a handout. And yet people who do take that, imagine that they have to move past all of these things. All of these things that might trap some of us. To be able to accept the help. And so it takes a lot. We don't think about it that often, but it does. To be able to say, thank you. Thank you for this.
And I think the washing of the feet
Yeah,
was a big part of this.
Most definitely.
I have lots of patients say, well, I don't want my kids to come and help me. But this part of loving them is to allow them to
yeah.
come and help you and take care of you.
It's
This
a
is
beautiful
part of
example.
this. So I think the washing
Most
of the
definitely.
feet comes very handy there.
Right.
Very footy here, yeah.
Yeah, very footy. I love it. But yes, and that's
Yeah.
and think about that. And it's not only that Jesus says, "I need to wash your feet," because Peter reacts probably a lot like how any of us would react. Whoa, no! You're not washing my feet. I need to wash your feet. And Jesus saying, "Look, man, if you want to be my followers, you let me wash your feet." right? He is forcing that, and then of course he said, well, then give me a bath. He says, no, you do that at your house.
Yeah.
I'm just here to wash your feet.
Yeah.
You know, but it is an example, it is an illustration of service. So it's not just that we are to serve, but it is also to allow others to serve us, right? And not not like I'm a king and you fan me and feed me peeled grapes, but like when we need help, it's okay. You know, it's okay to take that. It's okay to have help. You know, it's not a sign of weakness, right? We must allow people to help as we want to help, as we should be implored to help. All right, so next week we will polish off this section and move into the next section. And just to give you a little bit of, I guess you'd call it an appetizer, the next section is, why don't you just be yourself? And we're talking about the doctrine of sin. So